Hi, everybody. I'm going to represent the team today. It's myself as well as Adam, Kieran, Iqbal, and Reagan. And essentially our question is, are coastal cities ocean climate ready?
So to start, just if you picture your favorite cities on the coast and think of a couple and their diversity. Now think of 375 coastal cities. So experts identified, based on a specific definition that I will share with you, that there are 375 coastal cities across the United States. And we know that their proximity and relationships to the ocean put them at greater risk for sea level rise, for coastal erosion, and for more extreme weather events. And we also know that these cities are major boons for our economy. And that means that it's really critical and urgent that climate action that incorporates ocean climate justice and science-based actions is taken sooner rather than later. So a key actor in this space and our partner on this work has been Urban Ocean Lab. They are the experts that I just mentioned, and they are actually based not too far from here in Brooklyn, New York. So they're a think tank focused on the future of coastal cities. And so their mission is really to advance climate and ocean policy. And they do so through these 4 areas around policy solutions, resource collection and proliferation. They create a community of practice. They've even co-hosted webinars with the Climate School, and they disseminate ideas as well. Now, this brings me to our problem statement, which is that following a 2022 report that the Urban Ocean Lab conducted and released on the definition, the demographics, and the demographic indicator-based climate risks of coastal cities, they are now aiming to illuminate gaps in the climate preparedness across city size and region. And our research is a critical first step in doing that. Now, what do we mean by coastal city, and what do we mean by a climate action plan? So as a part of the 2022 report, Urban Ocean Lab defined a coastal city as a densely inhabited area in a coastal zone, coastal county specifically, with a population of 50,000 or more people. And just to note that coastal county is the sort of census-based, commonly used geographic zone, which is used in a lot of social science reporting. And we actually came up with this definition of climate action plan and had it approved by Urban Ocean Lab. And it might be surprising to realize that there isn't a standard definition, although I think a lot of our projects have kind of eliminated the areas in which there isn't standardization or consistency for better and worse. But it's largely a published strategy document that is developed by a city agency, in some cases reflective of a citywide planning effort where they brought in a consultant to help them identify key areas of effort, that assesses impacts, vulnerability, risks, and resilience, and contains evidence of cross-sectoral planning. So our methodology really looked at, first determining, does a city have a climate action plan or not? We used online tools starting with Google and keyword searches in government websites and their documents, such as sustainability, greenhouse gases, and climate. We had to, in fact, consider the fact that for a certain period of time, climate might not be reported, or rather noted in documentation. When Trump went into office, he didn't like the word, so it was banned, and so we had to account for that in the names of the documentation and really how it was addressed. And then we looked at creating a standard list of definitions, and of the cities with climate action plans, evaluating their inclusion of some some Blue New Deal themes and performing comparative analysis on those themes. And you'll learn a little bit more about those themes in a second. But just to say that the scope definition of coastal cities, of climate action plans, as well as of the policy themes and the scales for which they were included in the climate action plans is where our focus really was. This is not the most visually accessible to everyone, but I think everyone in this room can certainly get the gist. And what I'll voice over for you all is that we had two major phases of research. And in the first phase, we were looking at inter-rater reliability or agreement across whether different individuals determined that there was a climate action plan or not. And in phase two, we did that with specific cities across the country and looked at a categorical analysis as well. So you can see the statistical formulas that we used beneath each table. But suffice to say that there's substantial or moderate agreement, generally speaking, and that the categorical was where there was the most variation, which essentially means that for each Blue New Deal policy theme, we had different interpretations of whether it was included. And, the standardized definitions was a way to kind of decrease subjectivity. But as you might imagine, in the actions taking place in these diverse coastal cities, you can also expect to see some range from that as well. This is just a quick visualization that shows you the states that were determined to have coastal cities within them, and you can kind of visualize where they would mainly be, although not necessarily all directly right on the coast. And these are our key findings, which it's important to first note that, as you can see at the table on the left, that we're not looking at the same number of coastal cities in each region. So be careful in comparing them, but we took each within its region percentage-wise to say, so you can see that at the US level, 34% of coastal cities had climate action plans. And that maybe surprisingly on a regional scale, 44% of the Western coastal cities. So they had the most climate action plans published. And then on the right is by theme. And so you can see these mysterious Blue New Deal policy themes that I've been referring to: coastal adaptation and planning, coastal infrastructure, coastal ecosystems, and blue economy. So you can see that coastal adaptation and planning was the most, had the most evidence in climate action plans, and then actually just in descending order, coastal infrastructure, ecosystems, and the blue economy. And the highlighting there is just to note like the substance of that inclusion. Now, UOL was also curious about whether there was a correlation between city size and whether a city had a climate action plan, with a hypothesis that small cities would be under-resourced and would be less likely to have a climate action plan. That actually was not the case. In fact, reverse in a manner of speaking, because small cities had the most climate action plans, going up to the metropolitan having the least. And you can see the number of people on the table on the right. And on the left, you just see of the cities in each region, how many were small, medium, metropolitan, and large metropolitan in each region. And I think the other important takeaway is that small cities were they were the most small cities in terms of coastal cities. And it went up also actually in ascending order there. This visualization is really helpful to kind of see how each region is doing based on those themes. You can see that no region is doing particularly well in setting a net zero goal or in the blue economy, and that there's varying degrees of success or evidence rather in coastal ecosystems, infrastructure, and adaptation and planning. So now, what do I actually mean by these 4 Blue New Deal policy themes that were chosen as the priority areas areas. On the left-hand side of this and the following 3 slides, you'll see the subcategories of each theme. And you can think of those as kind of like the overarching search terms that we used in each climate action plan. So we were looking for evidence of at least one, if not all, of these elements. This one was the strongest in terms of evidence. So 91% of cities incorporated ocean climate issues into their urban planning. But we really noticed a lack of vulnerability assessment planning or vulnerability assessments being conducted prior to the climate action plan, which does raise some concern because where are they acting from and who are they leaving behind in that process? And I think we can guess. So the next one is coastal infrastructure, the Northeast leading with 95% of their action plans incorporating coastal infrastructure into their planning. But while we were doing this research, a white paper came out around coastal infrastructure that I did a deep dive into, and it revealed that major infrastructure projects are often positioned and continue to be sited on the coast. And there is little regulation on moving away from doing so. And there's also specifically no requirements around considering how coastal cities will specifically navigate, an high risk instance where your transportation, your energy, your water treatment facilities, the most critical infrastructure is likely to be damaged. Next, we have coastal ecosystems. The Midwest did lead with 70% of climate action plans protecting and restoring coastal ecosystems. I think we should caveat this to say that they are actually less likely to have like the breadth and diversity of coastal ecosystems that the other regions might. So it's kind of like they had a lower bar, I want to say, in that. But what was interesting is that, sometimes you can forget about the Great Lakes in terms of how that might impact them, and consider and have them be considered a coastal city. And we found some great research around the Great Lakes and the fact that binational and multi-state regulatory agreements probably had a really large role to play in ecosystem protection and the fact that it was included in their climate action planning. Finally, with the blue economy, the Northeast did lead with 36% of their climate action plans supporting and growing the blue economy. It was the least present, though, in themes across climate action plans. And the blue economy is a relatively new term, but we were using those categories there on the left. And the fact that those aren't included and aren't connected to thinking about green jobs and a just transition is another red flag for us in terms of gaps in planning. So that brings us to some major takeaways and sort of where we want this research to go. So coastal cities, they have an urgent need to prepare, and they also then can be sort of a policy incubator and drive state and federal policy because these cities cannot wait, and we're not seeing major concerted efforts on the part of the federal government at this time. In fact, we're seeing new oil and gas projects being opened every day. That's an exaggeration, but the data does suggest, though, that this planning that's happening is largely on paper. And I want to caveat with the fact that we didn't have the resources or the time over the course of the summer to look at the implementation stages of each. We did look whether they had a scale. Nature was often not included as a solution, unsurprisingly, to probably many of us in this room, and we would hope to see that change as well. And again, I just really want to hit home the fact that the vulnerability assessment planning wasn't central to climate action plans, and that is something that really needs to shift if they are to, bring everyone in and thus actually have a chance at true preparedness and resiliency. A lot of further research to be done, and we're excited to share these kind of priorities because they did come to light through the research that we did. That first one being the status of implementation of the planning. We want to look at city by city variation of those themes, social vulnerability. What's the political landscape shaping the policy? What resources are dedicated to climate planning, and is there a model that best advances action action, and inclusion of science as an integral planning element. We actually wanted to look at whether scenarios were included in the climate action plans, and from our initial survey to test whether that was like a true indicator, we realized that so few did that it was not like a viable data point, and that's concerning. So what now? We just want to really hand over this database of climate action plans and help Urban Ocean Lab to pressure city, state, and federal governments with where they can improve, establish guidelines for those climate action plans, and leverage IRA funding in order to support community-led projects, ocean farming, living shorelines, and sustainable fishing projects, which could hopefully include incentive mechanisms for both adaptation and mitigation. And with that, we want to acknowledge our partners at Urban Ocean Lab, especially Erica and Maddie, and Sari, who's here with us, who's been an integral part of kind of checking our research, performing analysis, and just gut checking along the way. So thank you. With that, thank you. And any questions?
So I have two different questions. The first one was there was a chart where you showed like the smaller communities and the major. Yes, that one. So if I'm looking at the total U.S. cities, when we're looking at the large metropolitan in terms of numbers versus cities with caps, it actually looks like every large metropolitan has a cap. So I was just wondering what was the choice in terms of numbers versus percentages?
Yeah, so we felt like this was the easiest way. The numbers for this was able to like more conceptually understand how many did, and it's a good point that you raise. It was interesting to us that there were fewer large metropolitan cities that were considered coastal cities. And so exactly to your point, like the majority of them did, and that shouldn't be surprising. I think where we're getting at, one thing we actually looked at in our extensive data tracker was the sub-region of cities, because we wanted to give Urban Ocean Lab a chance to look at like a scale above city that could begin to encourage action across cities. So for example, when we defined climate action plan, we did it at the city level, but we did actually see instances in which there were county climate action plans. And what we would really obviously like to see is that no city is like planning in a bubble, because they certainly don't operate or live in a bubble. So that was a little bit extra, but what's your second question?
So my second question is the cities with the climate action planning. You said that not a lot of them were mentioning the blue economy. And I know that was introduced around like 2011, 2012. And so just wondering if you notice if there's any shifts in like increase of blue economy, like if after a certain year, like 2015, 2016, you start to see that terminology appear more, or if it was just, if there was any correlation.
Yeah, that would be interesting. We actually didn't get to look at like that level of correlation, but I absolutely love that question. And I think we could include that in future research. It does raise an interesting sort of caveat to how we were thinking about the climate action plans. Originally, we were looking at, or we were wondering, should we establish a cutoff year for what constitutes a climate action plan. And then we realized that, like, again, speaking to the kind of concern around lack of standard planning, is that these plans were like hidden in different areas of the website. And then some of them had addendums, and some of them had entirely updated 2.0, 3.0 versions. All of this to say that we realized that we couldn't have a cutoff year, and we couldn't dig into the year as being a driver of action, because each climate action plan, depending on the landscape of that city, took a number of years to go from introduction to sign off. So I don't know the answer to your question. I think it would be really interesting to learn. What I can tell you, and team, feel free if you have anything that you observed to add to this, but what we did the kind of parallel that to your question that felt interesting was that we did see an arc or a transition in terms of how the action plans were named and like how explicit they were about climate change being human caused, et cetera, et cetera. Like some were like, this is our green plan. And they were like, we want public transport. And, it was like very like kind of not thinking about the broader ecosystem and like how things might change over time. Just like, someone's going to ask us about like our sustainability measures. So like we should probably get something out there. And like sometimes we have risks, and so we saw then more and more, it was like, climate action was actually more and more in the title, the more recent it was published.